Hi, this is JD, and in this lecture we're going to go over algebraic equations. So here's a little preview. We're going to go over the basics in solving equations. We're going to then go into solving formulas, solving inequalities, and then solving absolute value equations. So the main concept here is to think of scales, and to make sure that they're balanced scales. Whatever you do one side, you want to do to the other side. You want to keep them even. Now, when I say whatever you do one side, you do the other side, we're going to be looking at equations. So you have the left side and the right side of the equal sign. So your goal is to get the variable all by itself. So the first step is to simplify both sides. This is where the previous section comes in with simplifying algebraic expressions. Then step 2 is to add or subtract both sides, because you want to get the variables on one side and the constants on the other side. And then you want to either, step number 3 is multiply both sides by the reciprocal or divide both sides by the coefficient, because you want to get x all by itself, or whatever you're solving for. And then step 4 is kind of the optional step, and I would suggest when you verify your solution to verify using your calculator. Now, as you go along, key questions to ask yourself is, what am I solving for? Now, when you're just solving for x, it's not that complicated, but when you start doing formula equations, then you do have to ask yourself, okay, what am I solving for? Because there's different variables. And then you want to ask, okay, so what operation am I doing? And then how can I undo that? Alright, so we're going to start off with an easy example. So we have 5x plus 7 equals 22. So if you recall, step number 1 is to add or subtract both sides to get all your constants on one side and all your variables on the other side. So I want to remove this 7. So I subtract 7 from both sides. That will cancel it out. This is 5x plus 0, which gives you 5x. And then 22 minus 7 gives you 15. Then you want to get rid of that 5. So you ask, okay, what operation is being done? It's multiplication. So how do I undo that? Well, I would divide both sides by 5. And so then you get x equals 3. And that's your final answer. And then you can check this to see if it is a solution or not by just plugging it in. So 5 times 3 is 15. 15 plus 7 does give you 22. So let's look at an example. Now with this one, you can add it or subtract it as is if you want, but you might not like fractions. So what you could do first is you can get rid of the fractions. So to get rid of the fractions, you want to multiply everything by the LCD. And you can do that because it's an equation. Whatever you do one side, you can do to the other side. So let's first find the LCD. Looks like the only denominators here are 6 and 8. So let's first find the GCF of 6 and 8, which is 2. And then to find the LCD, we just ask, okay, what times 2 will give me 6? 4. Did I reverse it? Should be 3. I did reverse it. So this should be 3, and this should be 4. And that gives you 24 for the LCD. So let's multiply everything by 24. Now first it's going to look really complicated because we're going to multiply each term by 24 over 1. Now when you do that, things cancel out. 6 will cancel out with 24, leaving you with 4. 8 cancels out with the 24, leaving you with 3. So you have 4x minus 3x equals 3. 4x minus 3x is just x. So your final answer is x equals 3. So let's look at some other types of equations. So let's look at formulas. So here's a formula. It says solve for b. You have a equals 1/2 parentheses a plus b close parentheses h. This is a formula for the area A of a trapezoid where a and b are the bases and h is the height. So I'm going to rewrite that. Now what I'm going to do first is you want to basically solve the steps, or basically whatever you're solving for. So we're solving for b. So we want to get b by itself. So we can start by removing the parentheses. So we'll distribute. And you have 1/2 h, and you're multiplying each of those by 1/2 in h. So you get 1/2 HA plus 1/2 HB. Now I want to get rid of the 2's, so I'm going to multiply both sides by 2. When I do that, I get 2a. 1/2 times 2 is actually 1, so it cancels, leaving me with just HA plus the 2 times 1/2, that cancels. 2 over 2 is just 1. 1 times HB is just HB. Now what am I solving for? I'm solving for b. Okay, so I need to get rid of the HA. So this is addition. So I'm going to subtract HA from both sides. And they're unlike terms, so you just keep it. So that'll be 2a minus HA equals HB. And what am I solving for? I'm solving for b. So I want to get rid of this h. This is multiplication, so I divide both sides by h. And I get b equals 2 capital A minus HA all over h. And this is where you need to be careful when you're doing these. If you start off with a capital A, it has to be a capital A. If you start off with a lowercase h, it has to be a lowercase h. In here, you would either put it individually over each over h or all over h as I have here. And that's it. Once the variable is by itself, you're done, whatever you're solving for. So let's look at inequalities. So as you saw, that formulas are exactly the same as solving equations. Solving inequalities is the same as a linear equation, except when you multiply or divide both sides by a negative number, you have to flip the inequality sign. So that sign is to tell you to slow down a little bit. You have to flip the inequality sign when you multiply or divide by a negative. Now a negative could be on the other side and you divide both sides by a positive. The sign, the inequality sign, would stay the same. So it's only when you multiply or divide both sides by negative that you have to flip the inequality sign. So here we're asked to solve for 5x minus 3 less than or equal to 3x plus 7 and write the solution in interval notation. So what I'm going to do is when you're adding and subtracting, you can do it all at once. So I'm going to subtract both sides by 3x. I'm going to add 3 to both sides at the same time. You can do that with addition and subtraction, but you can't do that with multiplication. Alright, so I have 2x less than or equal to 10. I have to get rid of this 2. I'm multiplying, so I do the opposite. So I'm going to divide both sides by 2. I get less than, x is less than or equal to 5. I did not have to flip the inequality sign because I divided both sides by a positive 2. So now you have this, you have to do interval notation, and it's best to draw a line out first when you're doing interval notation. And what I would do is I would put this number on there, 5 and 0. Now, since this is an or equal to, you're going to have a closed circle because it can equal the 5, which means that 5 is part of the solution. And this means everything less than 5. So your arrow is going to be going this way towards negative infinity. Now, how do you do interval notation? Just the way that you see it. So you read it from left to right, always with interval notation. So it would be negative infinity to positive 5. And since you're going to include the positive 5, you're going to use a bracket. With infinity, whether it be negative or positive, you always use a parenthesis with interval notation. So let's look at another example. So you can kind of see that I distributed the negative for 4x plus 6. And I got negative 4x minus 6. And I distributed 2 over here, so 2 times 5x. And the 2 times 9 gives me 10x plus 18x. Combine like terms. So I combine the 10x and the 2x, and I get 12x. Add or subtract both sides, because you want to move all your variables to one side and all your constants the other side. So I'm going to subtract both sides by 12x. I'm going to add 6 to get rid of this minus 6. So here those 6's will cancel. That will give me negative 12x less than 24. And I want to get rid of this negative 16. So it's multiplication. So I do the opposite, which is divide. And I'm going to divide both sides by negative 16. And I get x greater than negative 3 over 2. Now the reason for that is because, remember, when you multiply or divide both sides by a negative, you have to flip the inequality sign. So it's x greater than negative 3 over 2. Put the negative 3 over 2 in there. Now, since there is no or equal to here, I'm going to do an open circle. And since it's everything greater, it's going to go to positive infinity. Now for interval notation, read it from left to right. So it's starting at negative 3/2. That would be a parenthesis, and going to positive infinity and beyond. Alright, so let's look at absolute value. Now, absolute value, what it means is the absolute value bars means distance away from 0. So the inside here can either be a positive 17 or a negative 17. So it could be plus or minus. So 4x minus 3 equals plus or minus 17. This sign right here is a plus or minus sign. So what this is saying is it could be plus or minus that 17. So what you want to do is you want to split it up. So we'll make one side positive 17, write one equation, and then write a second equation with a negative 17. And what we're going to do is just solve for each of these. So I'm going to add 3 to both sides. We're going to do the opposite. So that gives me 4x equals 12. So I'm adding 3 to both sides. The 3's cancel out. 17 plus 3 is 20. Now I want to get rid of that 4. 4 times x. So I divide both sides by 4 and I get x equals 5. Over here I'm going to add 3 to both sides, like over there. So the 3's cancel. That would be 4x equals negative 14. Then you're going to divide both sides by 4. So you get x equals, and we're going to simplify this. So 2 goes into both of those evenly. So that's how we got negative 7 halves. Now we started with, it could either be this equation or that equation. So it's either 5 or negative 7 halves. Now when you're listing solutions, now I forget if realize it requires this or not, but you would list out the solutions, and you would do that using braces. When you're doing braces like this tells you it's not in a rotation, it's not a point, you're just listing numbers. And that's it for that one. So let's review. What did we go over? So we went over solving equations, solving formulas. With solving equations, basic steps, your goal is to get all your variables on one side, all your constants the other side. Most of the time you're adding and subtracting first, and then you multiply both sides by the reciprocal or divide both sides by the coefficient, the number in front of the variable, and then that will get you x equals some number. We looked at solving formulas, and it's the same exact steps as solving an equation, except you have variables. So sometimes you have unlike terms, and you would just leave them. Your goal is to get a variable all by itself. When it comes to solving inequalities, we looked at how they're similar to solving equations. Whatever you do one side, you're doing to the other side. The only exception is when you multiply or divide both sides by a negative, you have to flip the inequality sign. And then we looked at solving absolute value equations, which what's in the bars can either be the positive or negative result. And so we split it up into 2 equations, where one number was positive on one side, the other one was negative, and then we just solved for x in each of those. Now with all of these, you can verify them. You can always verify them by plugging in the solution. Some of them are harder than others, so like solving a formula, to plug that in would be a little difficult, but you can certainly do that. When it is a solution, it's going to make a true statement, and when it's not a solution, it's going to end up being false. So that's it. Thank you for watching this video. Please like, share, and subscribe. And if you have any questions, put them in the comments below. Thank you, and I hope you have a wonderful night.